Hello, this is the first part in a series about using Corel Draw to create vectors that can be used on a laser for making marquetry pieces and also many other types of work. I'm going to cover some techniques here that you may not have seen before, or possibly you have, and you can leave a note and tell me that you have a better way of doing it. As you can see, I've loaded a bitmapped image into my Corel. I've also set its transparency to about 50%, and I've locked the bitmap, as you can see here. So I have this ready to go. Creating the vectors is fairly simple. It doesn't matter what order you create them in. I'm going to start with the shiny spot on his nose. I prefer to use the pen tool for most vector drawing. However, for something like this, I will select the ellipse tool, point at the center, hold down the shift key, and drag out an ellipse that more or less represents what I'm looking for. And now I have that ellipse. I will go ahead and select the pen tool to start drawing the outer shape of his nose. One of the things, most people tend to put too many vectors when they're going around curves. You should do it where you see definite changes in the curvature, and you'll save yourself a lot of grief. Double click to close this up. Excuse me, I made a slight mistake there, so I'm going to have to draw from here to here, close it up. Next thing I will do is select my shape tool and select all of the nodes that I just drew, and I will right mouse click on one of them and place it to the curve. If you notice, I have a shortcut key T out here to the right, and I'll be using that a little later to speed this process up. But for now, I wanted to do it this way so everybody could see what commands I was clicking on. So I'm going to curve. I'm going to right click again and select smooth. As you can see, I also have a shortcut key for that too, but I'll use the smooth command here. And as you can see, it's smoothed it out fairly decent. One thing I like about Corel is that you can point at the curve rather than try to deal with little handles, and I can just drag the curve out to where I want it. Now here's an example of where I probably use too many nodes, so I'll eliminate that node, and probably here's a good one too, and I'll take care of that. You remove a node by just double clicking on it and it's gone. So now I have that one. The next thing I'm going to do is draw his ear here. You don't need to do closed shapes first, I just happen to be doing it that way. So I will go ahead and select my pen tool again, and I will start right about here, come across to here. And since this is a cartoon, it's not real critical how precise we draw this. Also, it's not critical because when we get to the Smart Fill tool, you'll see that it'll take care of any errors between parts. So once again, I select my shape tool, marquee select all of the nodes I just drew. I say put them to the curve, and then I select smooth, and that smooths them out. And I can come here. One thing I'm doing here before I grab this, if all of these are selected and you try to move a curve, you're going to have a problem. So make sure you click off of the curve somewhere and then move up onto it to drag the curve where you'd like it. This one up here needs a little adjusting, so we'll just pull that up there a little bit. Maybe move this node over just a tad. There we go. That looks pretty good, so we have that in. And I suppose we could adjust this one a little bit. There we go. The next curve I want to draw is this one separating his muzzle. Now I'm going to go ahead and start using my hotkeys. So I've started up my pen tool. And I highly recommend using hotkeys. This will go much faster for you than constantly going to menus. Double click to end the curve. I'm going to select my shape tool with a hotkey, select it to a curve with a hotkey, and then smooth it with another hotkey. So now I have that smooth. That looks pretty good to me. Let's go ahead and draw this part of his muzzle down below here. It's very repetitive, and after you've done it for a while, you become quite fast at it. Once again, selecting the shape tool with the hotkey, to the curve, and smoothing. And this one could use a little adjustment down here. So I'll pull that down a little bit, or up, excuse me. And now I'll draw this curve, the large one going all the way around his head. Select my pen tool. And you notice I'm starting inside his ear. In fact, it's better to do that than to try to point at an intersection. You can see why in a little bit. So we're going around, just selecting points. Once again, shape tool. Select everything that you just drew. And we're going to put it to the curve, smooth it out. And now that one's fairly smooth. Drag this one out a little bit. There we go. And that looks pretty good. And we'll do this here while we're at it. Pen tool, starting inside again. This one we're going to do something a little different. You notice this isn't a smooth curve right here, but we're going to go ahead and put a point there and then go back on out to the curve and finish inside of his muzzle. This time I'm going to use the marquee with the shape tool to select everything. Then I'm going to hold down my shift key and remove that from the selection set before I say to curve and smooth. If you notice, that leaves that rather sharp rather than smooth. And I'm going to drag this just down in just a little bit there. So we've got a pretty good puppy dog ear there. Last thing we need to do is the eyes. And these are done a little differently. You go ahead and use the ellipse tool to draw the outside of the eye. That'll work good. And if you get something a little off, don't worry about it. You can always come in and kind of pull it around where you need it. Like here, I moved it down a little bit. Now what's a little different is there would be, you could do this two different ways, excuse me. You could draw this as another ellipse and then trim it, and you'd need to do that, otherwise it will cause a problem, as you can see. Or you can use the pen tool and just start inside and go around and do what you've been doing. Add it to the curve, smooth it out. For some reason this one didn't smooth. This is why I don't like little handles. There we go. That's pretty good. Yeah, maybe a little better. There, that's even better. Do the same thing over here. Using the pen tool, starting outside, working my way around. Shape tool again, to the curve, and smooth it. So now we're going to be able to start creating some of the parts for his head here. And you'll notice we have these lines that go inside. We're going to start with something fairly simple right here is his ear. Select the Smart Fill tool. Up here you can specify the color you'd like to fill. I'm going to choose something like a light green, and just point anywhere inside of it and click. And you see that I now have that filled with green, but it's not what you think it might be. it's a complete shape unto itself. I'm going to move it out of here, and when you zoom it up you can see that it's a vector shape. So that shape is one piece. I'm going to go ahead and put it back where it belongs by using Control Z. And all we have to do is the same thing with all the other pieces we want. And it doesn't matter how you do them. Pick the Smart Fill tool. I'm going to fill up that one. Oops. Fill up that one, that one. Just going around, clicking all the areas and filling them. And as you can see over here on the right hand side, we have a whole bunch of curves that are filled with green. I can select them all over here. Oh, excuse me, I can't select them all over there and move them. It doesn't allow that. So I guess what I'll have to do is pick them. And now I'm going to use my nudge. I always set my nudge fairly large so it doesn't overlap what I'm working on. So I've moved those over there, pick this one. Doesn't matter how you move them, and if you keep your nudge distance the same, they'll line up just perfectly the way they're supposed to. Now you can see here, let me go back. Now you can see here why I didn't close this. If I had to close this and then click to fill this area, there would have been a gap here. This way there was no gap. Yeah, we'll move them all over there. Now, one of the things you can do is change colors of things so that it makes more sense to you. I'm going to make his pupils black, make his eyeballs a gray color. I stay away from white because white is the background color and it's hard to tell whether you're looking at the background or an actual piece. Change his nose. Of course, his nose needs to be pretty black. His muzzle could be some shade of gray. His head, I don't know. Make it another shade of gray. Both of his ears. Now you can see what we have here. These are all vector images that are perfectly tuned. I can make a copy of this, and I'm going to move that over also, and to show you what's going on, select No Fill, and you can see your vectors here. Now let's move one of these vectors out and see what we have. Notice how perfectly that's lined up with the other one. That's what you're looking for when you do marquetry work. And that's exactly how easy this is to do. The Smart Fill tool is the key to making separate parts that need to go together in marquetry. So at this point, I'm going to conclude this part of the video and start preparing to do the next part of the video. Thank you very much. Hello again. Welcome to part 2, working with the vectors. Off camera, I went ahead and finished up putting in all the other lines around his feet and his paws and filled them in. And then I copied this image over to the right and I set the fill to none so that we could see through. We're going to need the outer shape of the puppy to insert our marquetry pieces into. There's a couple of ways of doing this. Sometimes I use the weld tool, other times I'll use the knife tool. I'm going to start with the knife tool and show you how that works. It's located over here in the menu, and it's called Virtual Segment Delete. Excuse me, not knife. So I'll click on that one and then point, for instance, here, and I can start removing pieces. As you can see, it doesn't always take all of what you want, but it's not that big of a deal, and it does work. But there will be another step when we're finished, and that can be a little tedious. So at this point, I'm going to back up by hitting Control Z, and we're going to start using the weld tool to see how that works. So we're back to where we were. Using the weld tool, I'm going to select the ear and his head, and then click on the weld tool up here. As you can see, that trims everything out. The next one I'm going to do will be his ear. Once again, select this piece, another ear, and click on weld. And I'll continue doing that, going around. Add that, weld. Now you'll notice that when I did that, for some reason Corel has created a lot of little lines right here. We're not going to worry about them, because what we can do is select and say break the curve apart, and then draw a marquee around that area and just delete all of them so they're gone. So now we're back to selecting two parts and welding them together. Takes a little while to work around it, but eventually you'll get there. Notice I'm not paying much attention to the inner parts, because at the end of this we're just going to delete all of those. Sometimes you can select multiple parts and then hit weld and it'll work. Other times it doesn't. So I just do them one at a time. I'm not in that big of a hurry. We'll just continue going around here, developing an outside outline. We're almost there. You can see here that I've selected this, and it's selected the entire shape, so I can't weld. So this is where I'll go to my knife tool and break these off and get this little extra piece that's out here, and that takes care of that. Now if you select one of the eyes, you can go ahead and delete it but you have to be careful, because it is possible to select the wrong thing. Notice when I select in here, I also get the entire outline. We don't want that, because I only want to delete the inside. So what I will do is click break curve apart, and now when I click, I will just get things on the inside. Press the delete key, and remember, you have lines over lines, and notice I lost that piece there. That explains the problem we were having there. So once again, break curve apart, select, and now I can get rid of the rest of the interior. Excuse me, Control Z. I did a marquee select, and I'll grab it this way and hit delete. So now I have the outline of the puppy. The only issue is that I'm going to select red here. It's not connected all the way around. As you can see, there's a black area here. That's not an issue. What we'll do is marquee select all of it, right mouse click, and say combine. So now that's joined. For on the CNC router and the laser, you need all of these to be exactly aligned. So I'm going to select my shape tool, and you can see the two open nodes here. So I'll click on those, right mouse click, and say join. The same thing here, and join. And the way to test that your shape is watertight is just to select a fill color. And if it fills, that means it's watertight and you're good to go. So now we've created an outer boundary that we can place our pieces in. This will be the pocket that gets machined or cut into the substrate. Thank you. Welcome to part 3, getting ready to cut parts. We've been working on this puppy, and last video we finished up the outline for the pocket. If you recall, when we started, I said that this puppy was quite large, and he is. If I select, for instance, his head, and I look up here, I see that he's over 8 inches wide and over 8 inches tall, just the head. We need to get that down to something more reasonable. The way I do that is that I select the dimensioning tool, and I'll use a horizontal or vertical dimension, and I'll pick somewhere on the left edge, drag out, and then somewhere on the right edge, and I'll move this dimension up where I can see it real easily. Of course, my font size is set very small, so I'll change that to something we can all see. And it's 14.02, and I'm going to change that to 3 decimal places just because sometimes I can get very fussy about things. So now I know that it's 14.8 inches. How do I get it down to where I would like it to be about 3 inches wide? How do I do that? The way I found that works easiest for me is I use the calculator built into Windows. And the issue is, what number do I have to use with 14 to get it to become 3? Well, the way you do that is you enter 3 into the calculator and then divide by 14.018, and that will equal 0.214. Now I'm going to move the calculator slightly off screen, but we'll remember that number, 0.214. And I'm going to set it over here a little bit. Go back to Corel, and now I will marquee select everything. And I'm going to lock the aspect ratio so that it scales equally in both directions. And where it says 42.996, I'm just going to enter times 0.214 and press enter. You can see immediately that it's scaled the part down to 3 inches, which is what I wanted to do. However, I had the puppy still locked, and so now he's too big. So I'm going to hit Control Z, make sure I select the puppy, which can be tricky. There he is, and unlock him, and I'll repeat that process so you actually get to watch it twice. Times 0.214. And now everything's scaled all at once. The only problem is my line thickness is a little heavy, so I'm going to go ahead and change my line thickness to something more reasonable. And now we have it down at the scale we're actually going to cut at. We don't need the dimension anymore, so we'll delete it. And that's the easiest way I've found to scale things to a size that you want when you're working with Corel. Okay, next thing we need to do is place these on sheets of veneer. And there's different ways of doing this, but the way I do it is I measure my veneer and I draw it on the screen. And this particular piece that I have is 12 inches long, and it is 4 inches tall. Turn off the lock. I forgot to do that, so I have to redo it. 12 by 4, press enter, and I have a piece of 12 by 4 veneer. Quite often what I will do is label these pieces of veneer so that I don't forget what they are. And I will refer to this as brown, if that's the color I'm using. And just put it here in the corner where it doesn't bother anyone. So now what I want to do is select pieces that I am going to use this brown color on. And it's easiest to work with the puppy himself and say, I'm going to go here, select a color, and these are the colors that'll be brown. It doesn't matter what color you select over here, just as long as you select one. And this one is going to become brown, this one brown. I'm looking at it. I think the one in here should be brown also. And I'll put another brown here. So I've got some browns there. This will be a lighter brown later on. So I'm just going to make it a pink color for that lighter brown. Doesn't matter. The wood is actually going to determine what color it is. What I'm doing here is differentiating between different items of this puppy. His paws and his tail, I'm going to select all of his paws to be a color, and I'm going to give him green paws so we can see it, and also his tail is going to be the green. So now we've got all these different colors on here. We're going to work with the ears first. So what I do is I select the ears, and I'm going to select several of them, and those parts, and then I'm going to copy them. Control C, Control V, and I'm going to move them up onto my sheet of material. Everybody does this different, so you do it the way you want to do it, but I like to start in the upper right hand corner rather than the lower left. It just works out better for me on my machine, as you might see later. And what I want to do with this ear, the first ear, is I want to align it to the grain. So I'm going to rotate it around. And then I'm going to place it on the sheet of stock. Do the same thing with this one. And of course, what's nice about this is you can save some material by tucking things in fairly close together. This one should probably be rotated too. Now you can get real fancy doing this, and it looks nice. So the more time you take lining grains and things like that, the better your job will look when you're finished. And I'm going to tuck this one in here. One of the interesting things that we can do is we can save this sheet later on, so that when I come to do another marquetry job, I will actually have these cutouts showing in my sheet of stock. In other words, I'll save this sheet off as the brown sheet that I used with the cutouts in it, so now I'll know where I can cut more parts on the sheet without having to guess. I'll try to demonstrate that as we go along. It's fairly simple. I'm going to make a copy of this just to show what's going on. Control C, Control V. Move it up here, and since I've got it all selected, what I'm going to do is say combine these items, and now this is all one curve, and I could select this and save it as brown sheet, and it'll show me all the openings I previously cut in it. And of course I can bring it back into Corel and then add more parts to it where I haven't cut yet. It makes a nice way to save quite a bit of material when you're working with these things. So I'm going to go ahead and delete it. We don't need it now, and take it out of there. I'll do the same thing for all the other colors that I want to do. I'm copying the sheet of material out so I don't have to do it again. And this one we could say is going to be the pink, so I'll probably put a label on here. Pink. And that'll take care of that. So all I need to do is select all my pink pieces down below, and I will copy them, Control C, Control V, drag them up onto the pink sheet. Now you'll notice that what's nice about this, because of the way we did it, I've got the holes cut in here for the eyes. The only thing I need to do is determine the grain direction here, and I think what I'm going to do is get the grain running a little bit like this, and then move this over into the corner, the legs were down here, so the grain should be running about 90 degrees to where it is now. So I think I'll just rotate all of these at once and then place them. You want to keep in mind your grain when you're doing this, because otherwise it can look a little odd. I also like to leave a little distance. I'm not that fussy about wasting a little bit of material. I'd rather do that than have a problem when I'm cutting. So now I've got the pink done. I'm sure by now you're getting the idea of how this is all coming together. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the video, finish up the other colors, and then I will come back to you. Hello. In the last video, we went ahead and created the outer outline. In this video, we're going to create the material to cut that outline in. When I do marquetry, I usually make a piece that I can assemble the pieces in and get them taped up. That's just really a jig, not part of the finished work piece. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Go ahead and make a piece of material over here. I happen to have a scrap piece of pine that is 5 by 7, so I will dimension that up. 7 inches wide, 5 inches tall, and we'll make it that size. Move it over a little bit, get it out of our way. And then I'm going to select the boundary that we made for the marquetry. I'm going to make a copy, Control C, Control V, and drag that over somewhere more or less in the center of the piece. This isn't critical. Remember, this is just a jig to assemble the pieces in. So now I have this all set to go. The next step is to save it out so that we can import it into Aspire. So I will select it, File, Export, and I'm going to save it up onto my desktop, and I'm going to give it a name of Puppy Boundary, and it's saving as an encapsulated postscript. So I have that up. The next step is to import this into Aspire and cut the pocket into this piece. So I will launch Aspire. I happen to run Aspire 4.5. This will work in any version that I know of. I'm going to create a new file, and it's going to be 7 inches wide, 5 inches tall, and I'm going to make it 0.02 thick. Actually, I shouldn't do that. I should make it something else. Call it a 1/2 inch. I'm using the upper right hand for my 0 point because this will be going into vise on the machine. Click OK. The next step is to import the vectors. And here's my puppy boundary, and importing them in. And now I'm going to align them to my work, to the piece. So I'll just center everything up. Close that down. So as you can see, I now have the boundaries here and I'm ready to go. The next thing is to toolpath this. What I do is I cut the boundary first, and I use a very, very small end mill that I purchased. I'm going to set the cut depth to about the same as the veneer, roughly 20 thousandths thick. Then I'll select the tool, and I have an end mill that's only 0.057 inches. I run it at 30 inches a minute because it is so small, and it has a very small pass depth of 10 thousandths. That could even be less. I think in this case I'm going to drop it down to 5 thousandths. Apply, OK, and the next step is to tell it that I want to be on the inside of these vectors. I should select vectors, by the way. And then I'm going to add a ramp onto it. I like to use ramps because it gives a very easy entry into the work rather than a plunge cut, which on a small end mill can sometimes result in a little ding. Wouldn't be important here because this is just a jig, but it's a good habit to be in. And frankly, I'm in no hurry. And I'm going to name this outer boundary. Calculate. And we'll go ahead and preview that toolpath. You can see now that it's cut around the inside. The reason I use that very, very small end mill is that it allows me to get into any tighter corners quite closely. So I'll close this, and the next step will be to pocket mill that out. I'm going to pocket mill it also to a depth of 20 thousandths. And I'm going to use an 1/8 inch end mill. I suppose I could maybe try a 1/4 inch, but like I said, this is, not that big of a piece. It isn't going to take very long. I'm going to leave a little bit of a pocket allowance, like 5 thousandths. I want to keep this cutter away from where I ran the very small cutter, in case there's any differences in it. So I've got that. I don't really, I'll leave a last profile pass, and we'll call this Puppy Pocket. And what I like to do on something like this is put in what I'm using for a tool right in the name of it, and we should probably look at what the step over and things like that are. The step over is reasonable, the feed rate's reasonable for what I'm doing here. Okay, and we'll hit calculate, and we'll preview this toolpath. That all looks pretty good. So we'll close this down, and I'm going to save this part of the job now. Save as, and this is also going to go on my desktop, and it will be the Puppy veneer jig, or fixture, I guess, and that way I'll have it. So at this point, what we've done is we're getting set up now to go ahead with our laser cutting of the pieces. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video again, and I'll be back shortly. Back. The next step in this is to export our actual veneer pieces into Aspire. It'll be the same technique we used as with the boundary. One thing you should be aware of is if you have pieces that are colored in Corel, when you export them, you'll actually get two vectors all the way around each shape. It evidently has something to do with the coloring. Don't ask me, I don't know why they do it. But what I do before I export them is grab all the pieces up and set the fill to none, and then I go ahead and export them. So I will export this out. This will be pink veneers, or whatever color you're using. And now that's been exported. The next step is to start up Aspire again. I'll minimize this. Create a new file. My veneer pieces were 12 inches long by 4 inches wide, and in this case they're going to be about 20 thousandths thick. Still use the upper right hand corner. Get the material. Import the vectors. Pink veneers.eps. Center them up. Now you'll notice one of the things I did, even though I didn't need this exterior boundary, is I exported it because that allows me to put the shapes exactly where they belong on the material. In other words, the material I specified is exactly the same size as the boundary that I imported. So I don't really need that. Next is to go over to the cutting, and in this case I want to cut the interiors out first. So I'm going to select both of the eyes, profile tool, and I need to select a cut depth. Now, cut depth with a laser, I use it a couple of different ways. Normally I specify it as 0.005 or 1, and each 1,000th causes the laser to make a pass. Think of it as a cutting tool with a very small depth of cut. But let's go select the laser beam, and I've got it here, and as you can see I've got a depth of cut of 1,000. So if I left this where it was, then I would get 20 passes on this material, which is way too many. But for the sake of this demo, I'm going to go ahead and say that its cutting depth is 20 thousandths of an inch. And I'm going to leave its speed down at 20 thousandths, see how that works. Click apply and OK. And you'll see that I now have one pass around the material. Let's go ahead and I'll just call this eyes and calculate it. So we have that done. And we'll double check it. Pays to. Yes, I was on the inside, so I'm where I need to be. Now we'll select the other boundaries. And also profile those. Same cut depth, same tool, only I need to be on the outside now of these. Pink outer shapes. Okay, and we'll preview all the toolpaths. Of course, it's very difficult when you're dealing with a 5,000th laser beam to see what you've done. I didn't cut deep enough to allow me to delete the outside material. So let's just go ahead and tell it to cut deeper here, like to 30 thousandths. That'll cause 2 passes, but that's all right. Evidently, it's not cutting through with a 5,000ths tool, but we can see the shapes. And this is what I want. So I'm going to fix up what I was doing here with the depth of cuts to what I normally would run. Depth of cut 1,000ths. Calculate it. Depth of cut 1,000ths. Calculate. And that's that. So the next thing obviously to do is to save these toolpaths off and cut them, which we'll go ahead and do. I use a laser post that I created that eliminates all Z motion because there's really no need for Z. This is flat material. The laser's just always cutting at the surface, and eliminating the Z prevents some accidents when I'm working with more 3D type shapes in the laser. I do it that way. The other thing is my laser does not have a control on it to turn the beam on and off fast enough, and frankly for the amount of this I do, I'm too cheap to go out and buy one, so I just go ahead and let it leaves a slight mark going across the piece, which is easily removed with a piece of fine sandpaper. So I'm going to go ahead and terminate this video at this point and save these files off, and then we'll be getting back to you. Thank you. I've assembled the puppy into the jig, and as you can see, I've held it down with Scotch tape. What I'll do now is go around the exterior of the puppy with an X-Acto and cut the tape away, but leave all the pieces connected to each other. That way I can turn it around, put the glue on it, and glue it right into the pocket on the final workpiece. and then just remove the tape off of that and sand it flat. See, it came out pretty darn good. You can see the lines right up in here where the laser rapid traverse. Those will sand right out, so I'm not worried about those. There's also one up on the ear here. There's some lines around there, but they all come off when you give it a light sanding. These pieces are about 20 thousandths thick, and they fit in pretty nice. The way I get these in there is I use an X-Acto knife to pick the pieces up and handle them. They're just way too small to even attempt to pick up with your fingers. So I hope that all helps. Thanks.